Listen, I've been a station security officer for 12 cycles now, and I thought I'd seen everything. Pirates trying to smuggle contraband in their stomach pouches. Check. Diplomatic incidents involving fermented beverages and zero gravity. Double check. A Velcarian trade minister accidentally declaring war because he sneezed during treaty negotiations? Yeah, that happened on a Tuesday. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day Ambassador Krathnak's offspring went missing and we found them napping with a human. Let me back up. Station 17 is what you might call a cultural melting pot. If your idea of a melting pot involves 67 different species all trying not to kill each other while conducting interstellar commerce, it's actually going pretty well, considering that 15 of those species are what we politely call apex predators, and another 20 are what they'd call lunch. The remaining 32 are somewhere in between, which mostly means they're nervous all the time and drink a lot. The Velcari, now they're in the apex category. Big scaly fellows, about 8 feet tall, with claws that could open a cargo container and teeth that made dental appointments a genuine existential crisis for their dentists. They're also surprisingly pleasant once you get past the whole "I could bite your head off" thing. Very into family values. Great at barbecues, though they get offended if you ask them to cook the meat all the way through. Something about honoring the prey and respecting the hunt. I stopped asking questions after the third cultural sensitivity seminar. Ambassador Krathnak was stationed on 17 with his mate and their 2 cubs, Vex and Nira. Cute little murder machines, those two. About the size of a human 7-year-old, which meant they were already sporting claws sharp enough to shred plasteel and a bite force that could crack bones like breadsticks. Their scales were still soft, that iridescent purple-blue that Velcari younglings had before they matured into the darker, harder armor of adulthood. They had these big golden eyes that would have been adorable if you didn't know that those eyes could track prey from half a kilometer away in total darkness. Now, humans. Oh boy, where do I even start with humans? They'd only been part of the Galactic Council for about 3 standard years, and they were already developing a reputation. Not for being particularly strong, though they were stronger than they looked. Not for being particularly fast, though their endurance was frankly terrifying. Not for being particularly good at anything specific. No, humans were becoming famous for being particularly insane. Deathworlders, the xenobiologists called them, in tones usually reserved for discussing plague vectors or black holes. Their planet was a nightmare classified as a Class 12 death world, which meant it was the kind of place where the weather could kill you, the animals could kill you, the plants could kill you, and sometimes the water just decided to fall from the sky as solid chunks of ice traveling at terminal velocity. For fun. And humans? They looked at all that and said, "Yeah, this seems fine. Let's build a civilization here. Let's make art and music and philosophy while dodging natural disasters that would sterilize most planets." The really disturbing part was that they'd gotten so good at surviving their nightmare world that they'd become almost blasé about danger. A Krillian merchant had once watched a human walk past a plasma conduit that was visibly leaking and making that high-pitched whine that meant imminent catastrophic failure. The human had apparently glanced at it, made a note on his datapad, and continued on his way while muttering something about filing a maintenance request. The Krillian had needed sedation. The human in question was named Marcus Webb, a maintenance technician who'd been on the station for about 6 months. Tall by human standards at around 6'2", built like someone who'd done actual physical labor instead of just going to a gym. He had dark hair that was starting to gray at the temples, which, according to human age markers, meant he was somewhere in his middle years. Kept to himself mostly, did his job, didn't cause trouble. Had one of those faces that looked friendly until you really looked at his eyes and realized there was something calculating going on behind there. The kind of eyes that said this person had seen some things and learned from them. The other species gave him a wide berth, which was standard for humans. It wasn't that they were afraid of humans exactly. It was more that humans had this unsettling habit of surviving things they absolutely should not survive, and then acting like it was no big deal. There was an incident in his second week where a plasma conduit ruptured near him. Should have flash-fried him instantly. The human had apparently looked at the purple jet of superheated gas, said, "Huh," grabbed a fire suppression unit, and calmly put it out while his uniform was literally smoking. When medical got there, he'd waved them off, saying he was a bit warm but fine. His skin had been bright red. He'd had first-degree burns on his arms. The medical scanner had detected elevated core temperature and tissue damage. He'd walked it off, filed his incident report, and been back at work the next day. This is what I mean about humans. Anyway, it was a normal cycle, or as normal as things get on 17. The station was running its usual chaos. The marketplace was full of traders haggling in 17 different languages. The environmental systems were maintaining atmosphere for 67 different biology types, which was a logistical miracle involving more filters and air processors than I cared to think about. Someone had set off the fire suppression in Bay 12 again, which happened at least twice a week, and nobody could figure out why. I was reviewing security feeds and trying to figure out if the Xylothian ambassador was actually smuggling something or just had really weird shopping habits when the call came in. "Security, this is Ambassador Krathnak." The translator carried the edge of panic in his voice, which was concerning because Velkari didn't really do panic. They did cold calculation, strategic planning, and occasionally righteous fury. Panic was not in their emotional vocabulary. "My offspring are missing." I was in his quarters 4 minutes later with a full security team. The ambassador was pacing, his claws leaving little scratches in the deck plating that the maintenance crew was going to complain about later. His mate, Shara, was standing utterly still in the corner, which was somehow more terrifying. When a Velkari went completely motionless like that, it usually meant they were either meditating or about 3 seconds away from ultra-violence. "How long?" I asked, pulling out my datapad to start logging the incident. 30 minutes, maybe 40. We were in meditation chambers. They were supposed to be in learning room." Krathnak's tail was lashing back and forth. Another bad sign. Doors were sealed, windows locked. They cannot have left. Except they had, because the learning room was empty. I checked it myself, scanning every corner with my security sensors. No heat signatures, no biological traces less than an hour old. The room was designed for Velkari younglings, with reinforced walls and furniture that could withstand their enthusiastic play. Everything was in order. Nothing was broken. The cubs had simply vanished. Now, you need to understand what this meant. These weren't just any cubs. In Velkari culture, cubs are sacred. They're also dangerous, sure, but sacred dangerous. The entire species is hardwired to protect their young with a ferocity that makes mama bears look like disinterested babysitters. There are documented cases of Velkari parents taking on entire military units to protect their offspring. Winning, I might add. And 2 of them were missing. On a station with 67 species, some of whom would see Velkari cubs as either trophies or appetizers, depending on their cultural background and dietary requirements. I called a code yellow, which is station speak for everyone stop what you're doing and help us look for something before this becomes a code red and people start dying. We searched for 2 hours. Every corridor, every maintenance shaft, every cargo bay. We checked the environmental systems in case they'd crawled into the vents, which was nightmare fuel because Velkari cubs in the vent system meant potential shredded ventilation and possibly shredded maintenance workers. We scanned the docking bays in case someone had tried to smuggle them off station. We checked the waste reclamation, the water treatment, the power distribution nodes. Nothing. They'd vanished like ghosts. My team was thorough. We had Thraxian trackers using their thermal pits to search for heat signatures. We had Xylothian technicians scanning the electromagnetic spectrum for signs of life. We even had a Zephite doing some kind of crystalline resonance scan that I didn't pretend to understand, but apparently could detect living beings through solid walls. Still nothing. Krathnak was approaching the point where his protective instincts were going to override his diplomatic training. I could see it in the way his pupils had dilated to almost fully eclipse his golden irises, the way his claws kept extending and retracting. His breathing had shifted to the rapid, shallow pattern that preceded a Velkari combat state. Shira had already made 3 separate species wet themselves just by looking at them while asking if they'd seen her babies. Her voice had been perfectly calm, perfectly polite, and somehow more threatening than if she'd been roaring. I was starting to consider a full station lockdown, which was going to cause all kinds of problems with the trading schedules and probably trigger at least 4 separate diplomatic incidents, when Jenkins, one of my junior officers, called in. "Chief, you're going to want to see this." "Found them?" Yes, but you're really going to want to see this." The tone in his voice made me nervous. Jenkins was a Drasnian, a species not known for being easily rattled. They evolved on a high-gravity world where everything was trying to eat everything else, so they tended to be pretty calm under pressure. If Jenkins sounded unsettled, something genuinely weird was happening. I grabbed Krathnak and we headed to the location, which turned out to be the lower maintenance section, specifically the small quarters assigned to Marcus Webb. This was one of the less desirable areas of the station where the environmental controls were a bit spotty and the quarters were cramped. Most species avoided it, but humans apparently didn't mind, something about it reminding them of their early space stations. The door was open. Jenkins was standing outside, looking like he'd just witnessed something that fundamentally challenged his understanding of the universe. His crest was fully raised, which for Drasnians meant extreme confusion or alarm. I looked inside and understood why. The human was asleep on his bunk. That wasn't the weird part. Humans slept a lot, about a third of their life cycle, which seemed wasteful but apparently was necessary for their brains to process information or something. The weird part was that Vex and Nira, 2 Velkari cubs who could probably take down a fully grown Thraxian warrior, were curled up against him, also asleep. One of them, Nira, had her head on the human's chest, rising and falling with his breathing. The other Vex was tucked against his side, one small clawed hand resting on the human's arm. Their tails were intertwined with each other, that unconscious sibling contact that Velkari cubs did when they felt safe. The human had one arm draped protectively over both of them. His other hand was resting on Nira's back, fingers splayed across her scales. They were purring. I didn't even know Velkari could purr. It was this deep, thrumming sound that vibrated through the small room. According to everything I knew about Velkari biology, that sound was supposed to be reserved for moments of absolute safety and contentment, usually only heard in well-defended clan dens. "By the ancestors," Krathnak whispered. His claws had retracted completely, another sign of shock. Velkari only fully sheathed their claws around family. I held up a hand to keep him from charging in. "Let's take this slow." We entered quietly, which was challenging given that Krathnak was 8 feet of scaled muscle and not exactly built for stealth. The human's eyes opened immediately, which was another unsettling human trait. They could go from dead asleep to fully alert in about half a second, with no grogginess or confusion. Prey species didn't do that. Predators did. Marcus looked down at the cubs, then up at us. His expression was calm, maybe a bit wary. He registered Krathnak's size, the ambassador's battle claws, which were now out again, and the fact that he was in a very small room with a very large, very concerned Velkari parent. To his credit, he didn't panic. "I can explain," he said quietly, in the tone of someone who wasn't entirely sure he could explain, but was going to try anyway. "Please do," I said, because Krathnak looked like he was about 2 seconds from either attacking or having a breakdown, and I wasn't sure which would be worse. Marcus carefully extracted himself from the cubs, moving slowly and deliberately. Vex and Nira made little grumbling sounds, but didn't wake up, just shifted closer to each other to fill the warm space he'd left. He gestured for us to move to the small kitchenette area, further from the sleeping pair. "They showed up about 3 hours ago," he said, keeping his voice low. "Came right through the door maintenance hatch. I was running a diagnostic on my quarter's life support. The CO2 scrubbers have been acting up. They just walked in." "And you didn't think to call security?" I asked. I was going to, but they looked scared. Krathnak's head tilted in that way Velkari did when processing unexpected information. Scared. Yeah, nervous, jumpy. Kept looking at the door like something was going to come through it. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a human gesture of stress or confusion. I've got a little sister about their age, relatively speaking. I know scared kids when I see them. They are predators, Shira said, speaking for the first time. She'd moved silently into the room behind us, which was terrifying because I hadn't heard her coming. What could frighten them? That's what I was trying to figure out. They don't speak standard very well yet, lots of gaps in translation. But from what I could understand with hand gestures and the translator working overtime, they were exploring one of the lower cargo sections. You know how kids are. Everything's an adventure. He smiled slightly. They found a section where some of the Krillian traders were talking. The traders were discussing how valuable Velkari claws and teeth are on certain black markets. The temperature in the room seemed to drop about 10 degrees as both Velkari adults went very, very still. This was the bad kind of still, the kind that preceded violence. They heard traders discussing harvesting them, Marcus continued, apparently not noticing that he was about 3 seconds from witnessing a Velkari rage state. And panicked. They ran. Ended up in the maintenance ways, got lost in the access tunnels, and eventually found their way here. I was the first person they ran into who didn't look like the species they'd overheard. And you just let them stay? I asked, trying to process this. The human shrugged, like this was the most obvious thing in the world. They were terrified. What was I supposed to do? Kick them out? They're kids. They are Velkari, Krathnak said slowly. Our young are dangerous. Their fear response is to attack. This is instinct. This is survival programming. Yeah, I figured that out when Vex here took a swing at me. Marcus held up his right hand, which I now noticed had a bandage wrapped around it. Blood had soaked through in a few places. Kid's got good form. Fast, too. Caught me across the knuckles before I could fully dodge. He injured you and you didn't call security? Shira's voice was dangerous now. That low growl that meant a Velkari was reevaluating a situation. He's a scared kid who took a swing. I've got nephews who've done worse during temper tantrums. One of them threw a toy truck at my head during Thanksgiving. Needed 6 stitches. The human looked at both parents. I put on a bandage, told them it was okay, and that they were safe here. That nobody was going to hurt them while they were with me. Then what? I asked, fascinated despite myself. Then they calmed down once they realized I wasn't going to hurt them back. Took a few minutes. Vex was ready to go another round, and Nira was backing him up. But I just sat down on the floor, made myself smaller, kept my hands visible, talked to them in a quiet voice. Eventually Vex stopped hissing and Nira's claws retracted. He walked over to a small table and picked up his datapad. We sat and talked for a bit. Well, tried to talk. Lots of hand gestures. The translator was struggling with the dialect. I showed them pictures of my family on my datapad. My sister, my nephews. Showed them videos of Earth. Figured they might like seeing another world. They seemed interested in the oceans. I guess Velkari Prime doesn't have much surface water. Correct, Krathnak said, still processing this information. We are a desert world. That explains why they kept asking about the whales. I showed them a documentary about humpbacks. They watched the whole thing. Marcus smiled at the memory. Then they showed me how to make that clicking sound you guys do when you're happy. Took me about 20 tries to get it even close to right. They thought my accent was hilarious. Then what? Shira asked. Her posture had shifted slightly, no longer quite so aggressive. Then they asked if they could stay here for a bit. I said sure. I made them some food, tried to figure out what Velkari cubs eat. Turns out they're not picky. They ate my entire stash of jerky. 2 months' worth of teriyaki beef jerky, gone in about 15 minutes. He shook his head ruefully. After that, I was going to call their parents. But they both just kind of climbed onto my bunk and fell asleep. I figured I'd let them rest for a few minutes and then contact you. Must have dozed off myself. Long shift today, 14 hours trying to fix the environmental controls in Section 7. There was a long silence. I could hear the station's ambient hum, the distant sounds of other quarters, the soft purring of the sleeping cubs. "You fed them," Krathnak said. "Yeah? You sheltered them. Well, yeah, they needed help. They injured you and you comforted them. It wasn't a big deal, just a scratch." Krathnak and Shira looked at each other. Something passed between them, some kind of unspoken communication that made me nervous. It was the kind of look that suggested decisions were being made, important ones. Then Krathnak did something I'd never seen a Velkari do outside of historical documentaries. He bowed. Not a little head nod, but a full, formal bow, the kind reserved for clan leaders and heroes. His hands were positioned in the traditional gesture of profound respect, claws fully retracted, palms up. "You protected our offspring when they were in danger. You fed them when they were hungry. You gave them safety when they were afraid. You bore their attack without retaliation." His voice was formal now, ritual. "By the old laws, by the codes of our ancestors, you have claimed guardian rights." What now?" Marcus looked alarmed for the first time. "It is complicated," Shira said, moving to stand beside her mate. She also bowed, mirroring Krathnak's gesture. "But essentially, you have proven yourself worthy of protecting Velkari young. This is the highest honor our kind can bestow. It has not been given to an outsider in 3,000 years. I just let them hang out and gave them some snacks," the human protested. "You did more than that," I interjected, because I was starting to understand what the Velkari were saying. I'd had cultural training on their species, knew their codes and laws. You saw two scared kids and helped them, despite knowing they were dangerous, despite being injured, despite the fact that keeping them here without reporting it could have gotten you in serious trouble. You put their well-being above your own safety, your own interests. That's the core of the guardian bond. "That's just basic decency," Marcus said, looking genuinely confused. And there it was, that fundamentally human thing that made them so weird. They thought that was normal. Most species, if they encountered scared juvenile predators from another species, would either run or call for help immediately. Self-preservation was a universal constant. You didn't put yourself at risk for someone else's offspring, especially when those offspring had claws and teeth and instincts that screamed danger. But humans apparently just adopted them and shared their snacks and showed them videos of earth whales. "The Krillians who spoke of this," Krathnak said, his voice taking on a sharp edge. "You know which ones. I've got the maintenance logs from their section. Should have visual records if they were in any of the monitored cargo bays." Marcus pulled up his datapad, scrolling through files. "I was planning to report it once the kids were safe. Figured that was priority one." "Of course you were," I muttered, making a note to update my reports on human behavior. Every time I thought I had them figured out, they did something that reset my understanding. We ended up in my office an hour later, reviewing the footage. Marcus had been right. Sure enough, 3 Krillian traders, identified by their registration codes as independent merchants with some questionable history, had been discussing the black market value of Velkari biological materials in what they thought was a secure cargo bay. They were wrong about the secure part. Station 17 didn't really do secure areas. Everything was monitored, because when you had 67 species living in close quarters, you learned that surveillance was the price of peace. The footage was damning. They'd been explicit about prices, buyers, methods. They'd even joked about how easy it would be to grab a cub if one wandered into the wrong section. They were arrested within the hour. Krathnak wanted to be there for the interrogation, but I convinced him that diplomatic incidents were paperwork I didn't want to deal with. The Krillians would be held pending trial, then deported at minimum. At maximum, depending on how much the Velkari government pressed the issue, they were looking at serious prison time. The cubs, meanwhile, had woken up and were currently in Marcus's quarters, refusing to leave. Specifically, they were refusing to leave Marcus. who they'd apparently decided was now their favorite person on the station. "This is problematic," Shira said, though she sounded more amused than upset. "They have bonded with him?" "Is that bad?" Marcus asked. He had Nira on his shoulders, her small clawed hands gripping his hair for balance. Vex was holding his hand, chattering happily in Velkari about something he'd seen on the human's datapad. Both cubs were completely relaxed, their body language showing none of the tension they usually displayed around non-Velkari. "It is unusual," Krathnak admitted. "Velkari young do not bond with other species. We are taught from hatching that we are predators, that we are dangerous. We learn to control ourselves around others, to maintain distance. It is for their safety as much as ours." "But they're kids," Marcus said again. Like this explained everything. Kids need to be kids before they worry about all that other stuff. "Human philosophy on child rearing?" I asked. "Common sense," he replied. "They've got their whole lives to be serious and worry about politics and species differences. Let them play while they can. Let them be young." Over the next few weeks, something remarkable happened. Vex and Nira split their time between their parents' quarters and Marcus's. The human taught them games from Earth, these bizarre activities involving balls and running and something called tag, that seemed to mostly involve chaos and laughter. He showed them how to build things with blocks, how to draw, how to play simple music on a harmonica he'd brought from Earth. The cubs taught Marcus Velkari wrestling, which resulted in him getting bruised regularly, but also somehow winning their respect even more. Velkari culture respected those who could take hits and keep going. Marcus could definitely do that. He learned their language, slowly and with that terrible accent that made the cubs giggle. He learned their customs, their games, their stories. He attended their coming-of-age ceremonies and family dinners, sitting at the table like he belonged there. Other species on the station started to notice. The Velkari cubs, previously kept at a distance because everyone was terrified of them, were now playing in the common areas with the human, who apparently had no sense of self-preservation whatsoever. Then other species' children started joining in. I'm not kidding. Within a month, Marcus Webb had somehow become the unofficial babysitter for half the station's youth population. Thraxian kids with their venomous tails. Xylothian younglings who communicated through color changes. Even a couple of the crystalline Zephites, who most species couldn't even touch safely because of their electromagnetic fields. He taught them all games. He made sure they played fair. He broke up fights with patience and humor, never raising his voice. He patched up scrapes and soothed hurt feelings and somehow made a dozen different species' children all get along. The common area became a playground. Species that had been enemies for generations watched their children play together and started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, they'd been wrong about each other. "How are you doing this?" I asked him one day, watching as he refereed some kind of game that involved 3 teams, 2 balls, and rules that seemed to change every 5 minutes based on suggestions from the players. "Doing what?" "This, all of this." I gestured at the chaos. A Thraxian kid was teaming up with a Xylothian to defend against Vex and a young Drasnian. Species that would normally never interact were laughing together. You've got the offspring of species that have been trying to kill each other for centuries, all playing together peacefully. Marcus shrugged. Kids don't care about politics. They don't care about old wars or treaties or who wronged who 300 years ago. They just want to have fun and feel safe. Give them that, and they'll get along fine. It cannot be that simple. It really is. He blew a whistle, calling a foul on a Thraxian kid who'd tried to use his tail to trip a Xylothian. The Thraxian accepted the call with good humor, helping his opponent up. Adults make everything complicated. We pile on all this baggage about history and tradition and what we're supposed to think about other species. Kids just want someone to pay attention to them and make sure they're okay. The rest is just noise. I watched a Velkari cub and a species that would normally be their prey, laughing together over a shared joke, and I had to admit, he had a point. The really weird part came about 2 months in. when Krathnak formally requested that Marcus be designated as an honorary Velkari clan member. This was unprecedented. This was insane. The Velkari had never, in their entire recorded history, adopted an outsider into their clan structure. The council debated it for 3 days. Representatives from a dozen species weighed in. Some were concerned about the precedent it would set. Others worried about the political implications. A few thought it was the best thing that had happened to interspecies relations in decades. They approved it on the grounds that if we said no, we'd have to explain to 2 Velkari cubs why the nice human couldn't be part of their family, and nobody wanted to deal with that conversation. Also, the Velkari delegation made it very clear that refusing would be taken as a grave insult, and nobody wanted to insult a species that could bite through hull plating. So Marcus Webb, human maintenance technician, became the first non-Velkari in recorded history to be adopted into their clan structure. There was a ceremony and everything. Traditional music, ritual scarification which Marcus endured without complaint, and a feast that lasted 6 hours. "Do I have to do anything different?" he asked when I told him about the council's decision. "You're now considered family to one of the most powerful predator species in the galaxy," I said. "You have responsibilities, clan obligations, mutual defense pacts. If a Velkari calls for aid, you're bound to respond. If someone threatens the clan, you're expected to help defend it. So, like, show up for holidays and birthdays and help out when family needs me." "Well, yes, but also there are formal diplomatic considerations and legal ramifications and—" "Sounds like family to me," he interrupted. "I can do that." And he did. He showed up to Velkari cultural events wearing traditional garb that looked ridiculous on his human frame, but that he wore with pride. He learned their history, their songs, their dances. He let Vex and Nira teach him everything about being Velkari, which resulted in him speaking the language with what I'm told is an absolutely atrocious accent that the cubs found hilarious, but that also somehow made him more endearing to the adult Velkari. The station changed after that. More families started showing up, knowing their children would be safe. The common areas became actually common, with different species mixing in ways that would have been unthinkable before. Trade increased. Diplomatic relations improved. We went 6 months without a single major incident, which was a station record, all because a human had found 2 scared kids and decided to help them. I asked him about it one day, during a quiet moment in the security office. The cubs were with their parents, and Marcus was helping me review some surveillance footage of the market district where a merchant was suspected of selling counterfeit goods. "Did you ever think, even for a second, that those cubs might actually hurt you? Really hurt you, I mean, not just a scratch?" Marcus considered the question, his eyes still on the screens. "Sure, they're dangerous. I'm not stupid. I've seen what Velkari can do when they're angry or scared. I've read the incident reports. Then why risk it? Because they were more scared than I was." He said it like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "And they were kids. You don't let kids suffer just because they might be dangerous. You help them. You show them they can trust you. You teach them they don't have to be afraid all the time. That's what adults are supposed to do." "That's very human of you," I said. "That's very anyone of you," he corrected, finally looking away from the screens to meet my eyes. "Or it should be. Kids are kids, no matter what species. They need adults who'll protect them and teach them and let them be young while they can. That's not a human thing, that's just the right thing. The fact that more species don't see it that way says more about them than it does about humans." Maybe he was right. Maybe we'd all gotten so caught up in our differences, in our fears of each other, that we'd forgotten the simple truth that some things are universal. Protection of the young. Kindness in the face of fear. The belief that the future could be better than the past. Or maybe humans really were just insane enough to adopt predator cubs and think it was normal. I'm still not entirely sure which. What I do know is that Station 17 is a better place now, and it's because a human looked at 2 of the galaxy's most dangerous juvenile predators and saw 2 scared kids who needed help. Last week, Vex and Nira started teaching other cubs how to play Earth games. There's now a regular football match every 7th day, which involves 6 species, 2 modified balls because the original kept getting punctured by claws, and rules that I'm convinced they're making up as they go along. The game usually devolves into cheerful chaos within 10 minutes, but nobody seems to mind. Marcus referees. He's got a whistle and everything. He's also got a collection of bandages in his pockets because somebody always gets a minor injury, and he's somehow become the station's go-to person for childhood medical emergencies. The actual medical staff don't seem to mind. They say he's got a good bedside manner. Ambassador Krathnak tells me it's the most entertainment he's had in years, watching his offspring tackle a Thraxian kid twice their size over something called a touchdown. Shira has started attending the games too, cheering from the sidelines with other parents. I've seen her laughing, something I didn't think Velkari did in public. The merchants in the marketplace have started keeping toys and games in stock. There's a new section dedicated to children's items from different worlds. It's become quite profitable. Me? I just file the paperwork and try not to think too hard about how a maintenance tech became the most important diplomatic figure on the station by basically just being a decent person to some scared kids. Humans, man. They'll be the death of me, or possibly the salvation of us all. I honestly can't tell which yet, but I'm starting to hope for the latter.